Canaanites,
Right.
and says, okay, their iniquity is not yet full. It'll fill up though. There will
Oh,
be
yeah.
a day that it
Oh,
will,
yeah.
it will fill up, but it's not yet full. So, you know, sometimes though we get these myths, I think, and misperceptions. And even though we understand intellectually that we are gonna be hurt at some time in our life, we feel like we shouldn't have been, it wasn't right, you know, and those type of thoughts then are the background for developing bitterness and issues of unforgiveness. So now the kind of the base passage that we're looking at is Matthew 18. I guess what I'd call the prior question that we need to answer, maybe it's still in that right-hand column there, is number one, how do we sometimes respond to those who hurt us, especially if they intended to hurt us? So give me some ideas. How do we sometimes respond? You know, maybe not you, but somebody you know responded to somebody that hurt them intentionally.
Yeah.
I have a
Avoid it.
tendency of ignoring them.
Yeah, avoid them,
Right.
avoid them.
Okay, so avoid them. Maybe sometimes stonewall them and just, I don't want to see you, I don't want to talk to you, talk to the hand, because
Well, sometimes
my spirit don't understand.
I'll try to, get a response from, well, why are you doing this? Why are you so uptight with me right now? What's really going on? That's,
So
I want to
try
know.
to talk it out.
Hey, we got a problem, let's work on it.
Yeah, so that's a good response, but that's
But
probably not a
mostly,
typical response.
it's kind of like Arnold says, the normal response would be put up the walls
Yeah,
and flee.
so here in Matthew 18, verses, somebody who has Matthew 18 open, read verses 23 to 27.
Says, therefore is the kingdom of heaven likened unto a certain king which would take account of his servants. And when he had begun to reckon, one brought unto him, which owed him 10,000 talents, but for so much as not to pay, his Lord commanded him to be sold, and his wife and children, and all that he had, and payment to be made. And the servants therefore fell down and worshipped him, saying, Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay their all. And then the Lord of that servant was moved and had with compassion and loosed him and forgave him that debt. And did you say down to 29?
No, that's good, just down to 27.
Okay.
So now, in looking at those verses, 23 to 27, tell me what emotion it was that motivated the master to forgive that servant.
He saw how sorry the servant was.
Right.
Yeah? So emotionally on the master's part, so he saw that. But it says in here someplace in those verses, it tells us specifically what emotion he had.
Compassion.
Compassion,
Yeah.
right, there in verse 27.
Yeah.
The Lord of that servant was moved with compassion.
Yeah. That's
That's why he loosed him, and kind of like Dave said in the opening session, part and parcel of the gospel, Jesus said, is that you are proclaiming liberty and you're setting the captives free.
Right.
Okay, so he loosed him based upon the fact that emotionally he had compassion. Now, so if you take that word compassion in verse 27 and then look down at verse 33, you see the word pity, and it's the same word translated differently. So we might say mercy even.
Right.
So the emotion, he had a certain emotion that motivated the way he was going to respond to this servant who, I take it that this servant, as we will read later on, the indication would be, when you take the story as a whole, is that this servant wasn't just inept, but he was intentional about probably defrauding or overcharging or whatever the case may be. It was premeditated type thing. And yet the master said, okay, when I respond to this, first emotion I'm going to have is mercy. Now, somebody read verses 28 to 34 that has their Bible open.
But the same servant went out and found one of his fellow servants, which owed him 100 pieces. And he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me that thou owest. And his fellow servant fell down at his feet and besought him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. And he would not, but went and cast him into prison till he should pay the debt. So when his fellow servants saw what was done, they were very sorry, and came and told unto their Lord all that was done. Then his Lord, after that he had called him, said unto him, O thou wicked servant, I forgave thee all thy debt, because thou desirest me. Shouldst not thou also have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee?
So now, out of those verses, pick one that you would think is maybe the key verse for this whole parable that Jesus is telling. What's the main point you think probably he's trying to get across?
That he had compassion on his fellow servants, even as I had pity on thee.
Okay. And that's probably the verse that I would pick as well. I mean, I think Jesus kind of tells this whole story to get us down to that bottom line of verse 33. Should not thou have also had compassion on my fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee? Compassion, pity. In other words, why didn't you have the same emotional response to the person who fell down at their feet begging for mercy that I had toward you? And especially as the one who is your master and you're the servant, my emotional response should have been the model for you. It should have taught you something about, how to respond to other people. And I think, in terms of what Jesus is getting across, if you put Jesus in place of the master, then basically he's telling you a big key about how to be Christ-like. How can we get Christ-likeness? So, one of the things that I would point out, kind of the thesis probably for this breakout session, is at the top left-hand corner of that first page, where it says "think." This kind of would be the thesis, and I got this out of a quote from a testimony of somebody else. I learned that forgiveness was not something I could do on my own, but that Christ could forgive through me.
That's true.